Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you from my very toasty warm backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. It's nearly 100 degrees here today, so I'm gonna hang here in the shade, try to stay a little bit cool. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, I hope you're having fun. Today we're gonna talk about a very adorable group of birds called puffins. Puffins are sometimes called sea parrots. They are a seabird, and all this week we're talking about ocean critters because Monday was World Oceans Day, and the ocean is big enough, I believe it deserves a week full of celebration. So today we're going to talk about seabirds, puffins specifically. Puffins live in and around the ocean in two big areas. There are three species of puffins. So over in the Atlantic Ocean area, there is the Atlantic puffin. That is the one that is most often featured in photos, and it is the smallest of the three. The Atlantic puffins during the winter time range further south. So during the cold weather, they move south to be in a little warmer places. And that would be as far south in the United States as New York, and over on the Europe side as far south as all the way down to the southern tip of Spain, and a little bit even in the coast off of Morocco and into the Mediterranean Sea basin. So pretty far south on the Europe side, not nearly as far south on the US side of things. During the summer months, they go north, and their breeding range is typically along the islands of the North Atlantic, with Iceland being the place that most puffins are seen during their breeding season, as well as islands off of the coast of Norway, and the UK being second to that, and Canada being third. On the other side of the world, in the Pacific Ocean, there are two species of puffins, the horned puffin and the tufted puffin. Both of them overlap in range quite a bit. The tufted puffins actually come further south during the winter time. They can sometimes be seen off the coast of California, near the Channel Islands during the winter time, and then all the way down to the middle of Japan on the other side, on the Asia side. The horned puffins don't come down quite as far, so they would be seen in the Pacific Northwest, places like Washington, maybe Oregon, and then also in Japan, but further north in Japan on the Asia side. During their summer breeding season, they are typically up near and around the islands of Alaska, and off the coast of Russia, and a little bit off of the coast of Japan and Korea. They are all fairly small birds, in my opinion small. I guess they're technically considered medium birds. They're definitely bigger than a little songbird you would see in your backyard, but they're not nearly as big as something as, say, like a goose or a huge bird like an ostrich. So they're classified as a medium-sized bird. Depending on the species, the Atlantic puffins are the smallest. They are only about 10 inches tall, whereas their cousins that live in the Pacific Ocean, the horned puffins, are about 15 inches tall, and the tufted puffins also are about that same size. So horned and tufted are pretty close in height. Tufted puffins are the heavier of the three species, coming in at over 2 pounds in weight. Most of the others are right near the 1 pound, maybe 1.5 pound mark weight-wise. Puffins definitely migrate a decent amount depending on the time of the year. So they go north in the summer, that's when they're breeding, and when they come south in the winter, they spend most of their time in the ocean, on the open sea. They don't necessarily come to land unless it's to breed and lay eggs and raise a baby. They are by far at sea more of the time. They are definitely a sea bird. The Atlantic and horned puffins look quite similar. They have a black body with a white belly, white faces, and then a bright colored beak or bill that's very large. It looks kind of too big for the rest of their face. And their beaks and bills can be red, orange, and yellow. The tufted puffins, which again are the biggest ones, are entirely black bodies with a bright colored bill and white on their face. In all the species, their colors, especially their bill colors, brighten during their breeding season. So in the early spring to summer, they're going to have the brighter colored bills and also the more defined colors on their body. During the off season of breeding, they're going to be a little more kind of grayish looking, and then it turns brighter black color during their breeding season. Puffins also have webbed feet, so they have feet kind of like a duck with webbing between their toes. That really helps them because most of the time they are at sea, so typically they float on top of the water and their little feet kind of paddle them around as they need to move on top of the water. But for when they are looking for food, they dive under the ocean. They are capable of diving down to depths over 100 feet, but they can only hold their breath for about a minute. So they can go pretty deep pretty quick, and they use their wings underwater to help them kind of fly through the water and propel them deeper and deeper in search of food. Now, most of the puffins, their main source of food is usually fish, although the tufted puffins will occasionally eat squid and krill, and the others will a bit as well. It just makes up a bigger percentage with tufted puffins. With them eating fish, they usually are going after small fish. They're kind of a medium-sized bird, so they're going after little fish, typically things like herring or capelin. Those are kind of similar to like an anchovy or a sardine in size, and they're the thing that I found really cool about puffins is as they're hunting for fish, they can put a fish in their beak and they'll hold it sideways like this with the tail and the head hanging out both sides, and then they can still catch more fish with their beak while they're holding on to that other one. They have a very specialized tongue that has kind of little bristly parts on it to help hold those fish in place. So they'll kind of push their tongue up to the top of their beak to hold a fish in place and catch more fish. They've been seen with as many as like 20 fish at a time in their beak. This is really important for the parents, the parent puffins, when they are gathering food for their babies. Most birds, when they are feeding their babies, typically swallow the food, partially digest it, and then regurgitate it back up. Puffins don't do that. They just keep the fish whole in their beak until they get back to the nest site, and then they feed their babies whole food, which is very nice and considerate for them. It also helps their babies to grow really quickly and learn what their food sources are very fast, because it's clear what that is. That's a fish. It's a whole thing. What else? They are very, very social birds. So typically when they're flying around, they're in kind of smaller groups. They don't typically go off by themselves. So they stay in a small group for safety and numbers reasons, usually like between like 15 and 20 of them as they're flying. But when they come ashore for breeding, they gather in huge colonies. So there are sometimes hundreds and thousands. In 2009, on an island off of Iceland, that's a very important breeding range for the Atlantic puffins, they counted 4 million birds on this one island, and estimated that there were over 1 million nests between them. So that would be some adult birds, some chicks of that year, and then also maybe some juveniles who didn't pair up to have a nest of their own. When they are in a big group, that's sometimes called a colony. It is also sometimes called a circus. They are also called sea clowns because of their bright colors on their face. And I thought that that was kind of fun, sea clowns and a circus for a group of them. With them being very social, they have very important rules of how to behave in puffin society. So they typically will stay clear of each other's nest, which is usually a burrow, a little tunnel that they kind of dig into the cliffside. The Atlantic puffins do more digging than the Pacific puffins do. The Pacific puffins sometimes just have kind of a hollowed out area, but they will dig in some of their breeding sites as well. So they dig a little burrow. The burrows can be actually quite big, like 3 feet in length. And then at the back of that, they build a little nest with some grass and some feathers. And they will very, very adamantly guard their burrow. So usually one parent will stay at the entrance to the burrow guarding while the other one is sitting on the nest. And then they'll kind of take turns going to get food. But they are very, very good at guarding and defending their nest, even from other birds that they are usually friendly with other times. They are very, very, very protective parents. To kind of minimize that, if a puffin is walking by another puffin's burrow, it usually will do some very strong body language, like lowering its head and tilting its beak and its eyes down, as a symbol of, hey, I'm not here to threaten you, I just need to walk past you. If they feel agitated, they really kind of stand up taller and puff their chest out, and then they flap their wings and open their beak and stamp their feet. And all of that is a pretty impressive display and threatening display if you're a little animal like a puffin. If you're a person, it's just kind of adorable because they're only this big and they're getting very mad and stamping their feet and flapping their wings. So it's kind of fun. But I think that puffing up of their chest and spreading their wings is probably how they got named puffins, would be my guess. I did not find anything that backed that up, but I think it's a pretty good guess. Puffins are amazing flyers. So they sometimes are confused with penguins because they live in cold places and they're ocean birds. But they are very good at flying, unlike penguins who cannot fly. Puffins can fly very well. They can beat their wings 400 times a minute, and they can be moving at speeds of 55 miles an hour through the air. So that's about as fast as a car drives on a freeway, as long as it's not going too fast. But that's pretty fast for a bird to fly, especially a smaller bird that's kind of pudgy-shaped body. It's pretty impressive to me that they can fly that fast. When puffins are courting, when they meet up, so during the winter time they go off and they're fishing and living in the open sea, they may or may not stay together as a pair during that time. But when they come back to their breeding grounds, they will find each other. They will find their same burrow that they used before. They will repair it as needed. But then with their courtship, they do some interesting behavior called billing. And they rub their beaks or bills together as a sign of commitment to each other before they decide to officially nest together. They are largely made for life, so typically they will pair back up with the same bird they paired with before. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes maybe one of the birds died, or maybe they didn't have very good success at successfully raising a chick the year previous, or even several seasons in a row, and then they may cut their losses and try with a different bird. But they typically only lay one egg. If that egg gets broken or stolen by like a predator, if it's early enough in the season, they will try to lay another egg. Depending on the species, the Atlantic puffins have to sit on the eggs for 36 to 45 days. The Pacific puffins are a bit longer. They're also a little bit bigger, so the chicks and the eggs will be a bit bigger too. They sit on their eggs from between 40 to 53 days. And then the babies hatch. The babies are baby. They usually only have one baby. It's very rare that they would have more than one. The baby puffin is called a puffling, which is kind of cute. And the parents, like I said, will bring it whole fish in their bill. And they feed it for about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the species and where they are. And then the parents are like, okay, see ya, kid, we're out. And they headed back out to sea. Before the baby's really big enough to, or old enough to fly. And so the babies kind of all hang out together at that time, with their feathers still growing in. And they have to learn to fly trial by air on their own with no one to really teach them. And then when they're ready, they'll fly away and go out to sea. And then they'll typically spend the first year or two after that out to sea before returning to the breeding location, usually when they're about 3 or 4 years old, but they won't actually breed until they're about 4 or 5. Now with puffins, because they're a little bird and birds are warm-blooded, they have to do some things to make sure they stay warm in the cold water where a lot of them live. The ocean in general in the northern portion of the world is pretty chilly, but especially up in their breeding range, up at the top of like Iceland and Canada and Alaska, that's some cold water. And so they actually are pretty waterproof. They have a special gland on their body that makes oil, and they rub their bill against that gland and then rub their bill all over all of their feathers, and that helps to waterproof them, so when they dive under the water in search of food, they don't become super wet, they don't get super cold, and then they can come back up to the surface, eat their food, and then they spend a lot of time preening or grooming their feathers. You'll see that quite often if you're looking at puffins. They'll flap their wings around in the water. They'll put one wing under the water and one wing up in the air to kind of shake this wing dry, and then they'll reapply the oil on that wing, and then they'll switch and do this one. But that's really important for them so that they can stay warm and stay dry in a pretty cool environment. With puffins, there are some threats out there that people are causing. One of the biggest is pollution, specifically from oil spills. Causes a lot of problem with that weatherproofing, waterproofing of their feathers. If there's oil floating on the top of the ocean, the puffins may get stuck in that. It can coat their feathers, it can cause them to get really cold and hypothermic, and then they can die. It can also inhibit their ability to fly, and then they may not be able to migrate when it's appropriately timed, and it can also cause big problems with their food. Loss of prey is another big problem for puffins, specifically in places where the ocean is being overfished and people are taking too many fish out of the ocean. In places they have definitely tracked that happening, just off the coast of the United States and Canada. Again, in a place just off the coast of the United Kingdom, England, Ireland area. They've also noticed that in a space off of Japan, where there's just not nearly enough fish anymore, and unfortunately the other animals who need fish are struggling to find enough food. That sometimes causes them to not successfully have babies that year, and that makes their population fluctuate. They are also sometimes caught as bycatch by fishermen, especially when they're using big nets. If the puffins are floating on the surface or diving under the water as the net's getting pulled in, there's a significant amount of puffins that are injured or killed during the fishing with big nets. In the open ocean in international waters. And then their final threat or problem that they have is some introduced predators. That's a bigger problem for the Pacific population, where some of their islands that didn't have any land predators now have some foxes and now have some rats. And both of those animals will sometimes go after the eggs or the babies, and the foxes will definitely go after the parents as well. That's why they kind of stay in social groups when they fly to help watch out for predators. Things like bald eagles are a threat to them in the Pacific, and in the Atlantic there's a very large seagull that is capable of snatching them right out of the air and does so frequently. With their threats, part of the loss of prey also can be attributed to climate change. As the ocean continues to warm in different areas, there are less and less fish in some of those areas, especially some of those small fish like capelin and herring. And the climate change has also caused weird weather patterns at some points, including very freak late season cold snaps and freezes, big storms that happen like in June in an area where the puffins are breeding, and they're like, oh wait, we're not prepared for this kind of freezing rain and ice and snow, and that's not who we are. That sometimes causes problems for them as well. With puffin species, the Atlantic species of puffin is listed as vulnerable, while the horned puffins and tufted puffins in the Pacific are both listed as least concern. All of the populations of puffins are decreasing. There's definitely less of them than there used to be. They still all have healthy populations of several million globally, so it's not anything super big to be concerned about now. But they are a species we need to watch as the human population continues to grow and as climate change continues to take an effect on the world and the ocean. Puffins are probably one of those species that are going to be fairly impacted by that. Ways that we can help out. Our special shout out today is to an organization called the Seafood Watch. They are spearheaded by the Monterey Bay Aquarium up in Monterey, California. And they really help us to monitor seafood that people eat so that we don't take too many fish out of the ocean. So they don't specifically help puffins as the Seafood Watch, but they do help all animals that rely on those fish in the ocean to make sure there's plenty of food to go around. Seafood Watch can exist as an app on your phone. So if you're in the market to buying shrimp or fish or shellfish, it's a very good way to check in to make sure that the ones that you're buying are harvested in a sustainable way. That means they leave enough of the fish out there in the ocean for the wild animals who need them. And also that they're doing things in an ethical way and not causing further harm to other species in the process, things like bycatch, or that they're following the regulations set in place by local governments to catch fish. In general, if it's U.S. caught, it's generally a good choice. There are some species that are a little more threatened that you need to be watching out for, but all of that information is in the Seafood Watch app that you can have on your phone, or there's a website you can go to as well. I want to talk a little bit about kind of a strange thing that happened with puffins a few years ago as the Lucasfilm was filming Star Wars: The Last Jedi. They were filming in some islands off the coast of England, and one of the islands that they were using to film on happens to be a very important wildlife sanctuary that is a protected space for puffins to be breeding. And during the time that they were there were a lot of puffins around. People at Lucasfilm looked at that very carefully. Did they want to try to digitally remove the puffins from their footage? Because the puffins were curious and kept coming into their set, into their shots. And they weren't able to scare them away or try to chase them away at all because they are protected at that wildlife sanctuary, and they had permission to be there filming, but not permission to harass the wildlife. So they came up with a really ingenious plan. If you're a Star Wars fan, or if you've seen the movie The Last Jedi, you may be familiar with the little critter that they call porgs, P-O-R-G. And porgs are a digitized version where they kind of created some fun animation that they superimposed over all the puffins that came into this scene and the set, and made it look like a little space animal that lived on this planet where they were filming. But that was kind of a fun thing that Lucasfilm did, and I'm happy that they didn't hurt or harm any of the puffins in the filming of the movie The Last Jedi. I'll be posting an article that talks a little bit more about how they came up with what they wanted the porgs to look like based on the puffin as the starting point for their animation. My experience with puffins is a bit limited. During my time at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, we did have puffins on exhibit, so I would see them fairly often, Both horned and tufted puffins live at the aquarium at the Pacific in Long Beach. I always enjoyed watching them, especially if it was any of those times when they were getting a little bossy with each other, or if it was feeding time. They were highly entertaining. To watch them swim underwater was incredible. They have a really good exhibit where you can see them both above and below the water, and a little cliff face with burrows that they can go back into for breeding season. So it was really fun to watch them there. As an educator, I didn't interact with the puffins at all during my time, but I did enjoy looking at them as I went about my day at the aquarium. That is what I have to share for you today on today's Critter Chat about puffins. As always, the full episodes of Critter Chat are uploaded daily to YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. So feel free to check out any of the previous episodes. And as we continue to celebrate World Oceans Day all week, there are a number of other episodes that I've done about ocean animals, so feel free to go back and watch any of those. Penguins are one, seals and sea lions, sea turtles. So there's a lot of information out there about other sea animals as well. We'll continue to talk about ocean critters the rest of this week. I'll be uploading some more information about puffins on the Zoo Nerd Facebook page later today, so feel free to check that out as it goes up. And until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun, and feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to any of the Zoo Nerd content across any of the platforms. See you tomorrow. Bye.